In this lesson, we'll continue shading our smoke particles that we had started in our previous lesson. Alright, so we've at least started the process of shading out these different smoke particles, but looking at the overall coloration of this, this is still quite a ways away from what you would expect your typical smoke to look like. So a couple of things we're going to do. We're going to start to shade this a little bit more realistically, but before we do that, we also need to address one little problem, which is right now, as we start to play this back, you can start to see how we have particles that will simply start to pop out of existence once they reach the end of their lifespan. Now, the problem is that if we start to render that, we'll also start to see that popping in our particles as well, where we start to have suddenly portions of our smoke back here that will suddenly disappear. So what we need to do is that as this smoke starts to emit, we want to make sure that it becomes completely transparent before the point at which it disappears, so that way we don't wind up with any odd popping or anything like that. So let's come back into our material editor, again just pressing the M key on our keyboard. So in our previous lesson we learned how we could use this particle age to begin shading our particles. Now we can also use this same procedure to start to control the transparency of our particles based on their age. So let's come in and we'll drop in another one of these particle age nodes. So scroll down, particle age. There we are. Now let's take this gradient right here and let's plug it kind of in the middle here. So around this 50% of the particle's age, we'll go ahead and just click and drag this in. Alright. Now color 3, by the point at which our particles reach 100% of their age, we want these to be completely transparent. So if this was going to be opacity mapped, this would be completely black. And then if we wanted to, we could actually make ourselves a new gradient map for color 1. So that way some of these particles start out a little bit more detailed with maybe some more fine patterns as they're born, and then start to soften out into this kind of a look once they reach kind of the middle of their age, before finally actually just completely becoming transparent by the time they reach the end of their age. So let's just take these 3 different nodes, and with all 3 of these selected, I'll just shift, click and drag, and that will not only duplicate those, but it will also keep their connections between each other. So now, if this were going to be my new color 1, you come in here and double click on one of these incoming nodes. Let's say the node for color 2, which is going to be this outer color here. And if we wanted to, we could start to maybe bring this down, make that pattern a little smaller and a little bit more refined. We could do the same for this color 3, which is going to be the centermost color. Again, maybe taking this, making it a little bit smaller. Alright, and let's see what that does for us. So let's take this, drop it up into color 1 of our particle age, which again, that's going to correspond to the age or the look of these particles once they're born. And now let's take this new particle age and connect this into the opacity. Alright, now let's re-render. And now you can see that we're pretty much getting exactly what we would expect. Now where we have this slightly smaller, finer pattern at the beginning of our smoke, it starts to kind of soften out into something that's a little more detailed, or rather a little less detailed, and then by the time we reach back toward the end, you can see our particles have completely become transparent. So sometimes what I like to do, just to be on the safe side with this color 3, instead of having the age set to 100%, to set this to something like 95%. So that way, instead of maybe running the risk of having some particles that still may pop and disappear, now we can make absolutely certain that before these particles reach the end of their age, that they are completely transparent. Right, now let's go ahead and do something similar to the coloration of these particles. So at the moment, you can see that these really are not shaded very realistically. So let's start to bring a little bit more realistic coloration into this, and even some texture to start to create the illusion of a little bit more detail. So let's start by just taking our gradients again, and just shift, click and drag, and we'll just duplicate this entire chain. Okay, so now let's start to take these different noise maps and start to color these up a little bit. Now this is going to be the map that corresponds to kind of the center of our particles as far as their age goes. So this is going to be kind of this area right in here that I'm going to connect this in. So for this I want the particles to be shaded maybe a little bit kind of a brown dusty color. So I'll just take this color 1 and start to find something that is kind of a nice unsaturated brown. There we are. And for color 2, we'll do the same thing. Just maybe use my eyedropper tool and come in here and just start by picking a color that's pretty close to that. Alright, and we'll do the same here for this other noise. Again, just sort of choosing kind of a light, dusty brown color. Choose my eyedropper and sample something that is going to be pretty close to that. Maybe make that just a little bit darker. Again, just kind of experimenting around with some of these different colors. So now we have something that is at least shaded a little bit better. So let's just see what happens if we were to take this and plug this into color 2 of our particle age. So again, this is going to be the one that controls the coloration of our particles. So let's re-render that and just see if we're on the right track. Alright, so now we can start to see a little bit more coloration in this. Now, if I were to zoom in a little bit closer, you can actually start to see kind of these dark halo patterns around our smoke. And actually that's being caused by this black color that's in this actual color. So let's come back, and since we do have something mapped to color 1 and color 3, we have this black color that's remaining, which is this outermost portion. So to try to eliminate that black halo that we had before, let's just try to come in here and match this pretty closely to one of these other colors. So again, just choose my eyedropper tool, sample something that's pretty close to that, and now let's see what that does for us. There we are, and you can see now that helps to remove a lot of that black halo that we had before. And now you can start to see a little bit more of this coloration just coming from this little bit of texture that we've added in here. So let's do the same to try to replace this green color up here. So again, maybe a good place to start would be to take these 3 different nodes that we have driving the frontmost color in our opacity. Again, just shift, click and drag. We'll move these up and kind of out of the way for now. There we are. Now for these, if we wanted these smoke particles to maybe start out a little bit darker, we could come in here and maybe start to kind of darken this up a little bit. So maybe something that isn't completely black and white, but again, just starting to introduce a little bit more gray and maybe some other darker tones in here. Just kind of playing around with these and really not being too conscious about the actual color itself, just kind of coming in here, looking around, and trying to find something that will hopefully work. Alright, so let's maybe come back. Looks like there may not quite be enough contrast in there. Again, just trying to pull out a little bit more of this pattern while not trying to lose that. Now let's come back again to this color 1, just trying to make sure we don't wind up with any halos or anything around here. Just come in and try to sample a color that's pretty close. So looks like again we may have lost a little bit of contrast. So might want to come in, darken that up a little bit more until we find something that works for us. Alright, so let's see if that's going to be pretty close. Oh, and this would probably actually work a little bit better if I actually connected that in. So let's go back, make sure that we do actually have that plugged in to color 1 of our particle age, and let's try that again. There we are, much better. So now we start to get a little bit more of this kind of subtle transition between your colors. Now let's also start to do something about this blue section of our particles. For this area back here, we could probably stand and just come in and take our color, set this down to something that is going to be kind of a medium gray. Alright, excellent. So now you can see that with this lighter gray color, that these particles really just kind of taper off and then disappear with really no noticeable end in sight. And that's really what we want to try to do, is just make this as gradual as possible. And again, just make this transition and the eventual death of these particles seem very, very smooth. So now that we have this set up, what we'll start to do in our next lesson is learn how we can start to duplicate these particle settings and then start to connect these to the actual geometry itself.